Hello and welcome to The People's View. My name is David Shonem and I'm your host in this program today. People's View is normally hosted by Carl Seidel, who's on vacation, so I'm filling in for him and I'm glad to have the opportunity. If you had a chance to watch some of the recent episodes of People's View, we've talked a lot about what's going on in Concord and some of what's going on in the city of Nashua. A lot of issues out there that we want to make sure the folks at home are aware of. Today we're going to take a look at something that's a little more Nashua specific. As you know, if you're a resident in Nashua, we had a reassessment, an assessment of the property, home values in recent months. And some of you may have experienced a rise in your assessment and, of course, a corresponding rise in your taxes. That's a big issue that a lot of folks in town are facing here. With me today to talk about that is Lori Ortolano. Lori Ortolano is a resident on Berkeley Street with her husband, and they have been dealing with issues in the city where their assessment went up quite a bit and their tax bill went up quite a bit as well. You may have read about some of that in the Telegraph. Lori, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here.
Yeah.
So let's start with some of the history. How long have you been in Nashua, and how did all this assessing, your involvement in the city and the assessing department come to be?
Okay, so we moved in about 5 years ago, and we were new to the city. We lived over in Litchfield for about 25 years. My husband is a Nashua native. He grew up in Nashua as a child and young man, went to college, and then got an assignment down in D.C. for the Navy. Spent 5 years in D.C. We moved back up to New Hampshire, ended up over in Litchfield, and then eventually, after 25 years or so, back to Nashua. So we came in 2013. We bought this nice home, and we didn't know much about the property or the values of the properties where we were moving into. After about 2 weeks being in the house, we received a letter from the assessing office that our assessment was going up $237,000.
Holy cow, $237,000.
Yes, and I was very surprised. It had gone up. The assessor had made changes based on the sale of the home. Before we bought the home, I went to City Hall, and I wanted to make certain that if there had been permits opened, that they were captured. I was smart enough to look into that and to figure out when they had done their last reassessment. Well, it turns out they had reassessed and finished in the fall of 2013. We moved in the end of December. So the reassessment had taken place. And the permits that had been pulled on the home, I was told, were closed. The last open permit had been in 2010, and it was for the finishing of the cellar.
So, since it had been so recently reassessed,
it
should have been current.
Right. So
We
that's
bought
what we
our
thought.
house in 2010. I bought it. We weren't married at the time, but I bought the house in 2010. And I went through the similar process where I wanted just to make sure that it was fairly current. And it was. And of course, I was on the Board of Aldermen in 2013 when that citywide reassessment was done. And so everyone should have been current at that time. So it was reassessed in the fall. You bought the house in December, and then suddenly up $230,000.
And the permits were technically captured. Well, so as soon as I got the letter in the mail, I was shocked. Really, when I looked at the tax bill was going to go up almost $6,000, which was a lot.
That's a lot.
And really, I had said to my husband, you know, if we knew that this was really going to be where it settled out, maybe we wouldn't have come into this house. But we're here now. So I called the assessing office. I had the assessor come out to the home. And he had a very funny observation, because the one thing I knew when we moved into the house is the neighbor next to me, whose house I had not been in, had put a big addition off the back. And apparently that addition had been completed in 2010, 4 years ago. I knew that I looked them up, their tax bill was maybe $1,000 more than mine. Their house was 1,000 square feet bigger. So my feeling was, we seem to be in line. That was my sense. Okay, this house has a big addition. They're bigger than we are. They're a little more than we are. Seems good. How can I be going up almost $6,000? And when the assessor came and got out of the car, and I said, he looked at the neighbor's house, threw his hands up in the air and said, well, none of that's in the tax bill. And I was shocked, because I said, that was put on like 4 years ago.
And we had a citywide reassessment a few months ago.
So what are you telling me? Well, instantly I was a little bit shocked, because, of course, in the back of my mind I'm thinking, oh, we just moved in, and these people are now going to get some massive tax increase.
Right.
We just moved in.
They're not going to like you as the new neighbors.
Here comes the new neighbor. Yikes. Okay, so get him in the house, have him walk around. He looks at he had upgraded our bathroom substantially to good and excellent, all of these fixtures in the bathroom. And really, we had a master bath that was renovated, but it was a small master bath. It was a galley master bath, showers, 2 sinks, and a toilet. And that being excellent was fine. We didn't care about that. But the other bathrooms were 1950. The toilets are stamped on the lids, 1955, 1961. These are old bathrooms with the old porcelain sinks and the little metal legs. They're to the period of when the house was built. And they didn't deserve to be rated as high-end bathrooms.
No.
They were not.
Right.
So actually, when he came through the property, he changed all the bathrooms. And there was a section of the entry of the home that was unheated. And he changed that section to unheated space. So I'll never forget when he came into the kitchen and he said, okay, I've changed the grading on 4 of the bathrooms and this section is unheated. I literally thought because it had gone up like $237,000 that with these changes maybe I'll come down like $50,000 or $60,000, you know, some big number.
Right. It
went down $6,000. So,
oh my goodness!
So I'm basically at $230,000 for the increase, and I was shocked. This can't be. How can this be? How can this be? Well, it was, and so out the door he goes, and my husband comes home that night, and I was like, "This is messed up. I don't even know what to tell you, but this is what happened." And oh, by the way, I think our neighbors will not be liking us shortly because I think that something's going to happen over there. And so, sure enough. 3 months later, the neighbors get hit with a $5,000 increase. Which
$5,000 increase in value or in taxes?
Their tax bill.
Taxes, okay.
And their tax bill, huge.
Yeah.
And that really wasn't right. It turns out from a legal standpoint of assessing, that really was not correct.
Because they didn't go in there.
No, and they didn't, you know, they basically put a hit on that home because of what we had bought our home.
To justify your increase,
right.
They're going to
raise theirs. And that's a spot assessing that should be going on outside of a citywide assessing period. It really was not a justified move. And so, so that was that. The next year, we really didn't know any houses on the street. We start to get no neighbors. We start to go into some homes, and I realized I'm not the only nice house on Berkeley Street, and I'm not. You know, there's other pretty nice homes.
Sure.
So the second year, I call into the assessing office, and I said, you know, I just feel like this really isn't quite right. You know, do you think this is right? And I get reassured that the value is good, fits right in with the street, this is all good. So the third year, I don't do a whole lot. My parents became very ill. There was just a lot of family stuff going on. It got complicated that year. But my tax bill was going up because everyone's was. The rates increases, and I'm watching it eke up. The fourth year, my July bill comes in at $18,000 on my tax bill for my home, and I am really annoyed. And I call in this time to the chief and had a very unfortunate conversation with him that didn't go well. But my concern was, you're not capturing permits correctly, you're not handling sales data correctly. And he insisted I was absolutely wrong. This isn't true. We capture all permits. We adjust sales valuations on homes appropriately. So I ended up saying, I'm going to be watching you closely. So then I started watching closely. I started watching permits getting pulled. I started looking at houses getting renovated. And I started sitting back saying, what are we charging for those? It turned out to be extraordinarily low or missed altogether. They weren't doing them. So in comes KRT, this new reevaluation comes through. The data comes out in August last year. When that data came out, it was so startling for my husband and I, because actually we've seen a decrease in our taxes this year because they didn't raise us higher. They couldn't have. But we are still so grossly overassessed within our neighborhood, which really tells you how far off we were. So if in 5 years, if the average home went up, 24%, and in 5 years we went up nothing, then it would appear that we were overpaying for those 5 years, because even on our street alone, the average increase was 22%. We didn't go up. So
KRT is essentially acknowledging that yours is already plenty high.
Was already plenty high.
Yeah.
Right. And so then I started, when we had all the data that was out on the computer, I started sitting down looking at house down the street and looking at valuations, and I was just like breathtaking when I looked at homes that were really comparable, not just Berkeley, but Chester, Concord, tried to take a neighborhood view. You know, I came up with assessment values. We were assessed at $700,000, and these other homes were assessed at $500,000, $515,000, $520,000. Well, that's a big difference.
That's a huge difference. Now, you described to me one time that there was a house nearby that had burned.
Yes.
That was renovated.
That became the pivotal home.
Yeah, tell us about that one.
So it was a home that had burned in 2012, and it was bought by a developer.
Did it burn to the ground?
It was a brick structure. So the brick frame remained, but everything inside went, and the roof was gone. So it ended up being stripped down to the shell. It had a detached 2-car garage, classic old home in an old neighborhood. So the garage was fine, but the house was pretty much gone to the brick structure. And it was bought by a builder, a well-known builder who does a lot of nice quality work. So they come in and rebuild the whole property. It was a brick hip roof home, and we lived in a brick hip roof home. It was 7 houses down from me. And it looked, I always walked the dog by the house and said, oh, it looks so much more modern. I didn't know it had burned. I didn't know the history of it. Until a neighbor said to me when KRT's data came out, that house is your house. That's a great comp. And that house is all brand new. It's got, you know, all new fixtures, new plumbing, air conditioning, done very well too. The carpentry, because it's a builder, it was done extraordinarily nicely.
Right.
So I pulled the data up the day I was driving to City Hall to go look at permits and to go talk to the assessor who assessed us originally. So I'm going in. I'll remember it. It was September 4th. I'm going to drive in.
Last year?
Yep.
Okay.
Drive in, pass by this house that burned. I said, I'm going to get in City Hall. I'm going to pull that property card. I'm going to go see what's going on. I go down to permits, I start checking, I pull the permit file on the home so I can see the details of what went on, the sizing and everything. It was a house maybe 100 square feet bigger than ours. Very comparable. I go to the assessing office, I start telling the assessor, I am frustrated, here's the data, I've called you, look at the discrepancy here. And then I said, how do you feel about, do you know 17 Berkeley Street? And his response to me was, I'm really good friends with that person. I go there all the time. And I said, how do you feel about that as a comparison to our home? It's a good comparison. I said, go get the property card. I want to see that. That house was assessed for $343.
Oh, boy.
And I was assessed
Yours is double.
$700. They were receiving, the property card was never done correctly. And the appraiser, the same one who, the assessor, the same one who assessed our property and created that assessment when the house was rebuilt, kept the house as a 1955 home and was giving it 35% depreciation. So it was a fully depreciated home that it didn't qualify for. And the property card was never updated appropriately.
It's a brand new home, essentially.
It's a brand new home.
The bricks were still there, but that's it.
Right. It had a lot more features than we had, even with AC and bathrooms.
So the tax rate isn't like you're being taxed an extra $1,000 or $500. It's really double.
Our bill was $18,000, and theirs was just over $8,000.
Okay, so it's more than double.
It was.
So we're not talking about a small discrepancy here.
This was huge.
This is a huge discrepancy, and anyone in any neighborhood whose neighbor has a house that's a little bit bigger, if their taxes were twice the neighbor's,
you'd go, wait a minute.
Right, what's going on here?
And so it really started me digging a little more. Like, how do we make a mistake this large? Where are our checks and balances and what's going on? So there were two things. One, we were focused on getting our property fixed. But then we started recognizing this is a bigger citywide issue. And at that time, our ward rep, Patricia Klee, was emailing us saying, I recognize this as a big issue. This is a big citywide issue. I hope you people will stay on this and not just address your own personal issue, but really address it as a citywide issue. And so she was really encouraging that dig. It didn't take a lot of encouragement from her because as I started digging, it was frustrating. It was It was nauseating. I would go into City Hall, quite frankly, sick to my stomach when I'd go down to permits and go up to assessing and pull property cards and see what I saw. It was really disturbing on how this process ran away from us and the inequities that were happening out there. And as I started to address it with management, there was a lot of pushback. You know, I was not credible. Initially, when I pulled a bunch of permits and started looking at how they were assessing permits, I made some mistakes, only because their method of capturing the permits is so inconsistent. Sometimes they'll go to a home, they'll assess a permit, and it won't get paid in the tax record for a year or a year and a half, because they're not going back to the office and putting it in. So and other people will have a permit assessed and it's in their next tax bill in 6 months.
Yeah.
Well, you need to fix that.
Yeah, I know someone, just a side story, who recently added a very nice workshop. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want them going back there, but he pulled permits, did everything he's supposed to do, and but there was never a final inspection. And he looked it up, and it's closed. It was done. I mean, the permits are closed, but no one ever came and took a look to see what it really looks like.
There was a good bit of that. And I collected, I ended up printing about 500 property cards. And I ended up going through permits, sales, all that stuff, looking at what was going on. And what I noticed is there was a tendency for the assessors to treat sales homes differently than permitted homes. So there's a term called sales chasing. It's illegal. Sales chasing. An assessor cannot sales chase a home.
What does that mean? What is sales chasing?
Okay, so outside a citywide assessing period, like KRT had just come in, if a house sells, an assessor is allowed to use the MLS data to correct a property card. And they can do it mostly they should be doing it in a quantitative way, less so in a qualitative way, meaning they look at the pictures online and they say, oh gosh, there's an extra bathroom in this house. The property card only says 2, but there's 3. So they can go on the card and they can add another bathroom and grade it.
So it's essentially they're looking at pictures in lieu of doing a tour through the house.
Exactly.
But they're not looking at what you paid for the house.
They're not supposed to.
They're not supposed to.
That's where it's illegal.
Okay.
You don't look at the price. You just look at the quality, quantity. You're looking at fixturing. Maybe it's got a finished basement that wasn't on the card. That happens all the time.
Sure.
You know, maybe it's got an extra fixture in one of the bathrooms, freestanding tub. Maybe the kitchen has been upgraded, and instead of being average, it's going to go good or excellent. So they can look at those things. But then there's qualitative factors like the effective year build and the condition of the property. Those factors play a big role in depreciation and moving your assessment. And so what I found they were doing is when they had homes that sold that they thought that the assessment there was a good gap between the assessment and the sale price, they take that condition factor and that effective year build and they crank it way up.
I see, because they needed to do something.
Because they wanted to do something.
They wanted to do something to justify
pulling it to the price. Now, they're not supposed to correct a home to the sale price, and they're not supposed to change these grade factors and condition factors outside the scope of the neighborhood. So you just have to stay within the boundaries of what your neighborhood looks like. And for us, they corrected our price, our assessment, to within 98% of our sale price. Okay, so they just, boom, brought it right up. But then they changed the effective year build and the grading so that of 55 homes on Berkeley Street, we became the number 3 home as considered the youngest home, the newest home on Berkeley Street.
Your home was built in what year?
1925.
But they're considering it to be equivalent.
1995.
Okay.
So what happened is the 2 houses that were in front of us happened to be homes that were built on lots that were divided, and one was a 1997 and one was a 2002. They were new homes.
They were new homes.
They were new homes.
So
they were 1, 2, and guess who fell 3? The Ortolanos. Because we got thrown to the top of the list because they corrected these parameters so hard. And they did it
by, I see, on that parameter.
And they've done this to a bunch of homes in Nashua when they want to justify a hard move. Well, they're not supposed to.
No.
So if they're telling you, oh, we're not looking at the sale price, really? You didn't look at that price at all?
Yeah, how'd you get to 98% of it?
And what I found, too, is there's a whole bunch of homes that are being corrected. But then I pulled sales data, and there's a bunch of homes that you can go on the MLS listings that have lovely improvements, as nice as any of these other homes, and they're not correcting them. One, because they don't have the movement.
Right.
They don't have the sale price movement to go and do it.
Right.
So they're as nice as our house, but their effective year build says 1959. Somebody who would take those two property cards and look at them would say, oh, this house that the Ortolanos own is a really nicely updated home, and this house is a pretty dated, older home, when in fact, they're the same. So there's no equity in these cards.
Right. So you're not after necessarily lowering your tax bill because you're paying too much. You don't like that there's inequity in the system, and that's
right.
The real issue.
We all have to pay our fair share.
Of course.
We all have to feel like but we all have to feel like we're being treated fairly.
Exactly. And I think the example that stands out there most clearly is the one of the burned house that is valued at half of your value.
And we never got an answer from the city.
New.
They never, spoke to it. I think it raised quite an issue in City Hall when we asked, how did this happen and what's the justification? Mum was the word. It was all very quiet in there. And then when I started looking at more of these permits, I started looking at other properties that had been adjusted hard, and I kept going in with data. It became very closed off. And then, just in expanding my search, I ended up stumbling onto the mayor's property card. That ended up being really interesting because he had pulled a $100,000 permit in 2008 to do a full remodel on the property. Okay, no problem. That's good. One of my complaints is that the assessors aren't closing permits in a timely manner. That permit stayed open for 5 years. That's a long time. And they didn't really get over there. But when the assessor got over to that property and they went in with the card and they marked up all the changes, they changed the EYB on that card to 19.
EYB?
The effective year build. They said, okay, this house has a lot of improvements, and they changed it to 1985. Now, it's interesting because all of those improvements were caught in 2012. We moved in 2013. So it's a comparable time frame.
Sure.
And they said, okay, the effective year build on that house is 1985. But then when they went back to the office, they only put 1970 in. So the house ended up not losing much at all on depreciation. This entire rebuild on the house resulted in about a $30,000 increase in their assessment. And our home, which was not rebuilt, it was just restored, went up $230,000. So then I said, wait a minute. There's an element of favoritism here. That concerns me.
It certainly would look that way.
Right, and we have to be open about having this dialogue. These people in our assessing office they take an oath, they have ethics, they're certified. They have to be willing to produce assessments that are fair for everybody.
Let's talk about the qualifications. So they take an oath.
Yes.
How does it work? How does one become an assessor? What is it? What's the role? And what is the licensing?
Okay, it's not a license, it's a certification.
Okay. Which is granted by the state.
Which is granted by the state, and they offer courses. You can take them within the state of New Hampshire and certainly around New England. There's I don't know if it's DRA offered or there's an organization called the IAAO, an international organization for assessing.
Okay.
They run a program, and they run assessing programs for level 1, 2, and 3. And I think when you hit 3, you can become a supervisor. But just to do the first level assessing and then go through all the training that you need and the hours you need, it takes about 5 years to become fully certified and independent at performing credible assessments.
And are all of our assessors certified?
All of our assessors are certified.
How many assessors do we have in the office?
4.
4, okay.
We've run with 4. We have 2 commercial, 2 residential. And our assessors are all certified. They've all gone through being able to list and measure a home to create the correct dimensions and capture data appropriately for how the structure of a home is rated. And we have different levels. We have one assessor that's an assessor 1. We have another assessor that's an assessor 2, and then I think we have 2 assessor 2s, and we have one that's an assessor 3/supervisor. And we now no longer have the chief in there. That position has been vacated.
And they have to take an oath.
So they have an ethics guideline, for standards of conduct. And, impropriety is a big part of that.
Which favoritism would be.
Totally. Right. And I think part of it is some of them get caught up. Here's my sense, too, as I've stumbled onto these properties that look like they've gotten some pretty nice gifts. My pitch is this is not on the property owner. It's not the property owner that's causing this problem. And I don't believe it's the property owner that's asking for the assessment to be low at all. I think it's the assessor feeling like they want to be thought of favorably, or perhaps the individual they're assessing could give them a good job referral, or find them another job, or help them in the future. It's that simple. It's a bias that's really simple.
Yeah. Interesting. I heard an interesting story one time. It had to do with union contracts here in the city. And the people that are voting on these contracts, like the Board of Aldermen, really we don't have a lot of money. Personally, they're not wealthy individuals. They're essentially volunteering for service. And the comparison that was made was that everyone likes to be a big tipper. You go into a restaurant where you're known as a big tipper, you get the corner table, you get the great service. So when it comes to union contracts, these people who don't have the personal wherewithal to necessarily be, in real life, big tippers, want to be a big tipper, so that when they walk into some place, the union members will see them and treat them well and give them a little favor, a little pat on the back, you're on our side. It makes them feel like a big tipper. And that was the example that was given to me. It happened to be with the school board. And I was astounded to hear that, but I thought it's very interesting that it's possible someone in these roles, we're just human beings, could be motivated by something as simple as that, wanting to be a big tipper, wanting to somehow curry favor, even when someone's not asking for it.
Exactly. That's how I look at it. And I look at it from that perspective because if you try and look at it from the other perspective, it's such a dark space, and it's so accusatory. And it just doesn't serve a purpose of trying to fix a problem that is a problem. So I've always chosen to say, I'm not looking at stuff that way. It doesn't, you can't make those links. It just puts people in a bad position, and I don't really believe that that's really the way it is rolling. I really believe it's a simple case of these individuals just wanting to be well thought of, and maybe not want to be viewed that they're not doing their job well when they're putting an assessment on somebody who's a high official, or somebody who's their boss, or any of these things, or somebody who's a big contractor, where they look at a lot of their properties. So, but it's a real issue, and I think I tried to address it with administration, but they really brushed it off as nonsensical and of no merit. Ultimately, it's why I filed a complaint with the state.
Now, tell us about the complaint to the state.
So what happened is I started going to the Board of Assessors meetings, and I decided, since I couldn't work through management in City Hall, the Board of Assessors is the oversight group. I looked it up in the charter, I read their mission statement, I looked up assessing boards through the DRA, and really they are the oversight agency. They're there to monitor policy and procedures created by the assessing department and make certain they're being implemented correctly. They have to approve all abatements that are being granted in the city, approval and denial. They should be doing, and they're going to start doing, all of these elderly tax credits. So this is the work they do. Awesome. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to start leaning on my Board of Assessors.
It's a city board.
It's a city board, and really...
They're also sworn in.
They're sworn in. They're appointed by the mayor, but they also are supposed to be operating independent of the mayor, independent of any... They are the oversight board.
Right.
And that is a very important thing, that independent.
Outside of a political influence.
Outside of a political influence. That's always a little concerning in your assessing department, that you have a political influence. So I decided I'm going to go through them. So as I started writing some of these letters up that I tried to address, the favoritism, the sales chasing, that I tried to address with, City Hall, John Duhamel, the mayor, John Griffin, the CFO, I just could not get through to him at all. So I said, I'm going to put these in the board packets of the Board of Assessors and switch my tactic over and start going over there. Well, that turned out to be a pretty big fail. That was not productive because they didn't know what to do with it. Yeah. They really had not had somebody challenge them or expect them to respond to something. I ended up getting on the agenda. They're a board that has no website and no emails or contacts. So you can't communicate with them. You need to get put on the agenda. They meet every 2 weeks, could be every 4 weeks. So you can have this long lapse of time. So I ended up getting on the agenda after a month, went in, sat with them, told them, you're supposed to be reviewing policy and procedure, and we have a problem here because your assessing department doesn't have policies and procedures. And they literally looked at the chief and said, do we have policies and procedures? And the answer was no. So that's where we were at. That was the starting point. And then when it came to the letters, they just didn't want to touch it. They didn't know what to do.
Yeah, and you never really know what goes on when we're not there either.
Exactly.
Phone calls and visits from administration. Or
exactly. And I felt like...
This is not the only case in the city where there's some kind of potentially, some allegations at least of interference with boards that are supposed to be independent. We don't really know
exactly
what's going on in this case.
We don't. And I think that, as I've worked through the assessing issues, I've certainly had my little letters and phone calls from people on other boards and other groups within the city who have said, you can't believe what's going on over here. Get over here and take a look. Well, I don't have time because I'm really up to my eyeballs trying to clear up what I think is some issues in assessing. But I believe that. I believe that there are probably some pretty interesting situations occurring within other departments. And
not the way it should be.
It's not the way it should be. And I do believe there's interference. For us, I think what was very disturbing is the mayor had taken a position not to speak with us because it was an assessing issue. I felt our issues really involved departmental issues with how they were handling themselves. But he didn't want to address that either. Okay, and he always said publicly, I don't get involved with assessing issues, I stay clear. But when it came to our assessing issues, he was going out publicly telling everyone, I don't know what their problem is, their tax bill went down. They should be happy. Well, he shouldn't be saying that. One, this is about equity. And I had to point out to him repeatedly, the tax office is a separate office from the assessing office. Your tax bill isn't the issue. It's your assessment. And we as citizens all have to focus on the assessment because that is where equity is established. It's not the tax bill.
No, because the rate's the rate, the same for everybody.
It's the same for everyone. And you don't go abate your tax bill. You abate your assessment.
Yes.
So you have to understand the process of assessing and you have to believe that you're being treated fairly. And we couldn't get him to acknowledge that it's the assessing issue. And that was frustrating. Even now, I don't feel he acknowledges that. And I think he's too educated to not know that. So that is frustrating for me.
So you were basically getting stonewalled at
Totally.
City Hall.
So
and then you filed this complaint.
So then I go to the Board of Assessors, and the chair says to me, and I told him that I told the board I was extremely displeased with the chief because he wasn't coming to work. He's not at work. He's not working 20 hours a week. We're paying, $96,000 a year to this person, and they don't come to work. This isn't right. Why are we doing this? And the chair said, oh, we don't get involved in any of that. You have to go to the state. The chief works for the commissioner, and you have to contact the commissioner. He slid a piece of paper across the table, and off I went. So the next day I called the commissioner. And, I have to say, they responded so fast, it was startling. I thought I was going to be thrown into another bureaucratic pit that was going to do nothing like City Hall. this commissioner called me back within 12 hours of 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 8 o'clock the next morning. I had a phone call.
Wow.
She gave me all the steps of what I needed to know and do. She ended the phone call by saying, would you like me to type this up in an email so you have everything listed out and written, so you understand everything we went over? Yes. She produced that for me. She walked me through what I had to do for this PA 71, which is a formal complaint against specific individuals within an assessing department.
I see.
And you have to bring the charges forward tied to the Assessing Standard Board rules that are state-approved regulations. So I got going, and I thought, if I can't make anyone in City Hall listen, then I'm going to produce this document and go to the state. I put a lot of time into it, and I'm still finalizing some parts of it. I'm actually bringing up another piece of it on Monday morning. But it ended up being 200 pages long.
Wow.
Of property cards, data files, write-ups. I mean, I put a lot of time into collecting information. And I know when I went up there, 2 or 3 weeks ago with the document, the lady came out of the office and she almost fell over. She said, we have never, ever seen anything like this. And I think it's opened a really interesting situation because the state historically really doesn't have these cases to deal with. Anytime somebody has filed a complaint, my sense is it's been dismissed because it's been either very minor or it resolved itself. And I walk with...
Or the city may have taken care of it. Who knows how.
Right. And I walk with a document and I am charging sales chasing, misconduct, work performance, dereliction of duty, willful negligence. I mean, there were 7 blocks to check off, and I checked off 6. Right to know law. I went right at it. I said, I can give examples on all of this. I'm going to do it. So I did.
First case in the state, largely.
Yes. So
that's not a first that Nashua really wants to have.
No, it wasn't.
But it's important to do it.
So I think at that point, I'm being directed by the chair to work with the state. I think when it came out that that was the direction it was going, then the mayor said, okay, we're going to do an audit. We're going to do our own independent audit. And we're going to use, my chief of staff and the CFO to do it. I was not happy with that originally. I wasn't.
Yeah, it sounds like...
Because it was too internal.
Too internal.
We've got all these problems.
Especially if this board is supposed to be independent.
Right. And I've been through all this stonewalling, and now the people who are stonewalling are the people who are going to go investigate.
Right.
And these issues, in my opinion, went all the way up to the mayor's office. Really? Is this chief of staff in the end going to point the finger at him?
Right.
No. Is the CFO going to say I, didn't do my job? No. No. It ended up coming out that way. But so I think the report ended up producing information that was more direct than I thought it would be, but I think a lot of it was driven out of the fact that I had gone to the state.
Yeah.
It was, they had to do something now.
Right. Did the report sort of scapegoat to the assessing department and not go beyond? This is where the problem is, and the oversight piece wasn't really missing or discussed.
Yeah. Well, I think it focused a lot on the chief that position they let go, the ex-chief. But our issues were much deeper than that. They went back much farther. So it wasn't just this individual; it was the prior chief as well. And then everyone who could kind of read the document could see that the CFO had dropped the ball. He just didn't do any oversight in there. And for me, it's inexcusable if somebody's not coming to work, and for 4 months I'm saying to you, this guy doesn't show up. What does it take for you to know that he's not at work? Why do you allow this?
Yeah.
And that to me should be something they could do a quick audit of that in a week and understand that. It shouldn't take 3 years.
Right.
So that's disappointing, but that told me how little observation was going on in there. So I think that report produced what it produced, and it was a management audit report. So now we need to get into the technical audit report. That's where we're at right now. And Kim Kleiner is doing an amazing job at trying to put this all together. She is working her butt off, and we get our money's worth out of this woman.
Good.
We do. And I think she understands the residents. I think she's got the best handle on what the people want. I don't feel anyone else in there does, though. And she cannot be an island on that. You know, so I still feel, I don't feel like Steve Bolton. I get frustrated with the city attorney. I know his job is to defend City Hall people, but when there's been such darkness and such wrongdoing, there comes a point in time where I think you got to say, okay, we haven't done things correctly, we got to change it, and stop fighting that everything's right. You know, everything is right in there.
Yeah.
According to him, everything's right. There isn't anything wrong. Sales chasing doesn't exist. You're wrong. But we've never had a discussion about it. How we correct properties when they sell, we don't discuss that.
So it sounds like there really needs to be someone independent. I mean, Kim Kleiner's done a good job, but
she's done a good job.
It goes beyond her role, really. It's not her capabilities, but beyond her role.
Oh, it's
and maybe it should be
challenging.
Someone independent to really come in and take a look and to take an honest look. Because I alluded a moment ago to the fact there's other cases in the city that involve some meddling with boards that are supposed to be independent. And I think under these circumstances, you really need to someone needs to come in and take a fully independent, thorough look at whatever's going on and really bring all this stuff to light. Because otherwise, we're not seeing things clearly.
We're not, and it's so hard. I mean, it's so challenging when you're a resident, and
it's not easy to fight City Hall, right?
Oh gosh! I mean, I think I made amazing strides.
Yes.
I really think I made amazing strides, and so I'm pretty pleased that I've been able to do what I did with a pretty small group. I really never focused on the group. I just focused on the work, and I was just committed to. I mean, I put in 30 hours a week for 6 months on this.
Right.
So I just keep going and going and going and going and uncovering what I do and bringing it to light. And, part of me, I'm sure they just want me to go away now, okay? I'm sure their feeling is, we've got this. We've identified it. We've got this. But I don't think that's entirely true. And you need to trust but verify. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, we should have a verification process, and we should be able to understand. The transparency piece is not there, and that's frustrating because this mayor ran on a big campaign 4 years ago on transparency and accountability. There still is not much public transparency on what's happening in that office.
No.
And they have to, and I think they're aware they have to improve on that.
You wanted to make sure everyone knew your tax bill was going down.
Absolutely.
That's transparent.
That's right.
But your assessment hasn't changed.
Right. So yes, exactly.
So the big thing, the big picture is still not complete.
No.
And it's not right.
No. And I think they're they're working with KRT a lot. They're consulting with them, but I want them to even be careful with that because KRT has a certain vested interest. They produced the numbers for the report.
Right.
They're going to defend them.
Right.
I actually think KRT did the best they could with the data they had, but garbage in gives garbage out.
Yeah.
And the property cards are not in good shape.
Yeah. Anytime a consultant is hired too, they want to be hired again.
Well, they do.
And
Look,
they know that the mayor's office is paying those bills. Or City Hall's paying the bills. You're not paying those bills. And so they're going to make sure their customer's happy.
Right.
And that's part of the problem. Maybe the state could do some kind of an audit. Is that possible?
Well, the state does audit. So here's what goes on. The state has a system where every 5 years they send somebody down to look at our records. The thing is, their protocol for doing that is so superficial.
It's a big state. So.
It's a big state. And what I think could happen, and I think what might happen out of all of this when I'm working up in Concord, I think the resources for cities from the state are too limited. You have a lot of smaller towns that are doing a better job at assessing than we are. And they're actually assessing every year. They use vision appraisal or avatar, and they use these outside houses, and every year they get reassessed. They just do it. And their records are being maintained, and equalization is happening constantly over there. So the state goes into those towns every 5 years. They're small towns. Maybe they need to shift resources and say, well, we'll go to those towns every 7 years, and we're going to spend more time in the cities. Because the cities are where a lot of problems can exist, and a lot of darkness can hide.
Sure.
And for example, they come down and they pull a sample, permits, but they collect like 40 data samples for 28,000 properties. That's not a big sample.
No, it's
That's
small.
not a statistically significant sample. And what they collect, what I learned for permits, is they come in and they look at only permits that have been closed in the last year. Okay, so my complaint is they've got open permits from 5 years ago they haven't caught, that are not assessed. Or you kind of mentioned your situation where something never got picked up.
Right.
They're not looking at those. Well, those are the problem.
Right.
And then they're looking at list and measure. They're looking at, did the assessor go out and measure the improvement or the permit correctly? If it was a deck put on, if it was a shed. A great many of their permits that they pull that the state comes down and measures are decks and sheds. Well, you know what? That's pretty basic.
Right.
Okay, so running around and looking at, oh yeah, that's an 8 by 12 deck. Yep, they got that one right. You can use pictometry out of the office and the GIS mapping to nail that.
Sure.
So I think they're not going deep enough, and they're relying. Maybe the relationship is too cozy, even at that level. Maybe they're relying a little bit on, oh, we come in and they tell us everything's great, and the city knows they're coming, so you can do a little cleanup, right? You dust a little more. You put a thing, you create the order you want to create, and then they come and they take a very small sample size and they do their few little things, and out the door they go. See you in 5 years. And the mayor was really touting that. You know, he was on me a lot that this isn't valid. The state came in 2015 and we got an A. We got an A, Lori. They were here and they gave us an A. And you know what? Next time I want an A+. Well, you got an easy A. You know, were your A's all easy in school? Some of us had to work. You know, I had to work. Working A's make better products.
Right.
So,
what's the next step on this on the complaint with the state?
So the state will be taking a look at it all very closely, and it could sit up there for 6 or 7 months. So that's going to be a work in progress. I've started going up to the state and attending some of the meetings up there for assessing. Really interesting. They have some talented people. They have some nice boards that are working hard. I've kind of enjoyed my time going up to Concord. So that's sort of where that sits. And then on our side, or my personal view is I would like to see people understand the abatement process better. There's almost 400 abatements that were submitted this year based on this citywide reevaluation. They don't have the resources in the assessing office to handle those. And I don't think people realize the way the law is set up. The city has until July 1st to evaluate your abatement. But if they don't get to it, it's an automatic denial and you go out. They're under no obligation to look at it. That
sounds too easy.
It's too easy, and what I have found is some of the assessors don't get anything done. They have abatements for 6 months and they get 4 done in 6 months. And the other 25 are all stamped with a D because July 1 came. Oh, that's not right.
No, it's not.
Okay, so I'm starting to uncover that and I'd say that's wrong. Because then what happens is the person has to go file with the Board of Tax and Land Appeal or Superior Court and be heard in the court. There's a filing fee. When you head up there, you really need an abatement appraisal. It gets a little more expensive. So it's better if you can work at the city level to just use your comps and sales data and go in there and say, here's my difference. But they have to seriously want to consider you. And what I'm finding is residents are being circular filed a lot. Now the mayor, when this whole assessment thing went on, he kept saying, people have issues, no problem. You can abate. I don't think most people knew that if it's not looked at by July 1, in the trash it goes.
I certainly never knew that.
No. I mean, my husband, when he heard that, he's like, you know what? If it's not done by July 1, every one of those should be granted, accepted.
That's what it should be.
They're accepted, not denied.
Right.
So it puts the onus on them to get the work done.
Yes.
But they also knew in a citywide reevaluation, they were going to have more. It's very common to see more. This was even a little more than the 2013. I think they had like 250, and here they had like 380. But this is the first time since 2006 that we've had property values going up. We did an evaluation in 2009. The market crashed in 2008. We did one in 2013. The market was still sluggish, was limping along. And now we've come to 2018. Well, guess what? We've seen a pretty big swing now.
Right.
So it's not surprising that, and we've had these strata of homes in this KRT adjustment that frankly got whacked. Condos, ranches.
Right, we were talking about that earlier. These are homes that are popular in Nashua because they're entry-level starter homes for folks.
Right.
And the market is hot for those homes.
Right.
And so we're seeing 30 or 50% increases, or maybe more.
Exactly. So a lot of these people in these ranches that are maybe 1,000 square feet to 1,300 square feet saw their assessments go up $1,000 or $1,500 or $1,800. That's a lot.
Yes.
They were very surprised by that.
Their taxes go up by that much.
I mean, yes, their taxes went up by that much. So they were really surprised and, concerned because they thought they weren't going to see that kind of increase. It just happens that the sales data supports those assessment levels. And then you look at homes that are in the $500,000 category or above, and you find they didn't go up as much because, quite frankly, there aren't as many buyers at the high end as there are at the low end. So there were big strikes down there. And these people some of them have filed abatements trying to figure out, do I really fit in here? But the whole abating process is just not understood by the public, and it's because the burden of proof when you abate is on the property owner.
Right.
So you have to come up with the sales data to show that you are out of whack or disproportionately assessed. The database in City Hall that they have you use to look at sales data is so user unfriendly and poorly laid out that what I can see looking at all these abatements is that everyone is making bad picks. They pick terrible properties as comps. The assessors almost never use it. Their data isn't good. They end up not getting what they want or being denied. So we need to become way more educated as a public on how to abate, how to abate and win, how to capture the sales data. I'm kind of asking City Hall to update the search sites so that there are more fields in there. You can't search on the date of a home. Well, look at it. We live in an old home neighborhood.
Sure.
If I want to look up colonials, I don't want 2010 colonials.
No.
I want 1925 to 1940 or 1920 to 1940, and I want to click that button and do sales.
Right.
If I put in colonials, I'm going to get 300 houses, and I've got to go and search, click on the MLS for 300 homes and try and see which one's old and which one matches me.
Sounds like someone's trying to discourage you from doing that.
That's the problem I have, is I feel they've set it up so that we have a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And they're not allowing us to fight fair. And then they don't allow you to print your property cards or any other card without spending $1 a card. You can get your own personal card for free. But if you want to get property cards on your street or data, it's $1 a card. And if you wanted to take, data home, you pulled up 25 houses, you'd have to print the 25 cards, pay the $25 and go home with them. That data should be on home computers now.
It really should be.
It's simple.
I think that to try to put the taxpayers are paying the bills here. To try to put taxpayers at this kind of disadvantage in order to protect a system that I think people know that there are faults.
Right.
And certainly from the effort that you put in, people have to be understanding that, there's probably something to this.
Right.
And so they're denying it, I think, hoping it's just going to go away. And that's not fair to the taxpayers.
No, so we're hoping to set up a nonprofit that is a social services nonprofit that we can use to make some YouTube videos and educate people on how to abate, how to do these searches, how to read their property card more effectively, give people a little more of a fighting chance.
Good.
And, just create an awareness. And then I think the city will continue to make their strides, and we have an obligation to keep pushing them. If we improve how we abate and we become stronger at knowing what our rights are, it will inherently drive the system to be better.
It will, and I think we should always strive for excellence, and I think we don't have it now.
No.
And I think there's been a lot of lip service. We have excellent this and excellent that is said all the time, and it's not really the case.
No.
Now, as you've done this work, you're beginning to see that there's probably some spillover into other departments where there are some issues. Do you plan on getting involved in those departments too, or
well, we'll see kind of where it goes, and I would definitely encourage people because it's important work. It's good work. And, you know, any of us who have kids and look at the next generation coming up and the hurdles they have to face, we want to, you know, have them participate in a city that they can trust their city government, they can be treated fairly, services are good, and we're making good decisions. We're doing the right things.
Right. Sounds like the city maybe needs to focus on some of these core basics, you know, that are more important than maybe some of the other things that seem to be driving a lot of people's attention.
It does. National footprint, you know, stuff that draws people to want to campaign on it and use these buzzwords is all nice, but it seems like we have a lot of very pressing needs right within our departments that we could work on and drive tremendous improvements that would make our city a better place.
And that's really the bottom line.
It is.
We want it to be a pleasant place for people to live. When I was an alderman, I said my goal was to have people go to sleep at night and say, you know, I'm glad I live in Nashua.
Exactly.
And that's the way it should be.
It absolutely should.
Pleased to be here. I'm happy to tell their friends about what a great city it is. And instead, their friends are likely to hear more stories about how their taxes are going up and services don't improve and this is going on and that's going on. And
I think we've got, you know, Kim Kleiner's attention, and I think she's very focused. And I think within the assessing department itself, when you walk in that office, the women down there are so professional.
Good.
They work hard. They address customer issues very well. They're performing their roles beautifully. We need to look at creating standards within our assessing department, understanding our software, and having accountability over there.
Yeah, and I think it spills over to other areas too.
And then it sweeps right through what's happening in other departments in the city, for sure.
Good. Well, Lori, thank you very much. We'll be following this very close and looking forward to seeing the stories in the Telegraph or the Union Leader and seeing what happens, because it's very important for all the folks at home, for all of us to understand that the city needs to be honest and transparent in the way they conduct themselves with regard to taxpayers.
Definitely. You know, I think we're going to make strides. We're going to get things fixed.
Good.
You know.
So, well, we're out of time. Thank you very much for coming in. I really appreciate it. It's been a great story. So the hour went by very quickly.
It did go by quickly.
It went by very fast, and we're really glad that you're pursuing this, and that it's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank folks at home, too, today for tuning in. Thank you. You're watching The People's View. My name is David Schoeneman, filling in for Carl Seidel, who will be back in the next week or two. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.